May 20 AD. 2010. Europe steps in front of the cameras and announces a rescue that is supposed to end the panic. Greece will receive $110 billion, 80 from its Eurozone partners, 30 from the IMF. The numbers are meant to sound overwhelming, final, calming. For a moment they do see or they're so, sir, or, and then the markets keep selling anyway. Bond yields rise. Credit default swaps widen. The euro, designed as a shelter from monetary storms, becomes the epicenter of one. This is the first visible crack. A currency created to make crises impossible is now producing a crisis that no single country can control. The contradiction is immediate and public. If you are a Greek pensioner, your paycheck is suddenly uncertain. If you are a German taxpayer, you're told this rescue is not a bailout, even as your money is wired south. If you are a French official, you watch something deeper unravel. The rules are being bent in real time, because following them to the letter would collapse the system. The question hanging in the air is simple but unsettling. How can a currency shared by 300 million people need an emergency rescue just 11 years after its birth? The treaty said there would be no bailouts. The politicians say this is an exception. The markets hear something else, that the system cannot survive its own design. Behind the numbers is a quieter realization. The euro has no army, no treasury, no single government. Yet it is expected to behave like the currency of a state. When fear spreads, it has nowhere to go except back to national capitals that no longer control their own money. The rescue of Greece does not close the story. It opens it. Because if $110 billion is not enough to restore confidence, the problem is no longer Greece. The problem is the architecture itself. And that architecture was not an accident. To understand why the architecture looks the way it does, the story has to rewind 20 years to a moment when Europe's map is still changing shape. November 1989. The Berlin Wall falls. Within months, German reunification stops being a slogan and becomes an administrative fact. 40 million people, one economy, one currency, suddenly folded into another. For Paris, this is not just history. It is memory resurfacing. France has seen this movie before. A larger unified Germany at the center of Europe has always shifted the balance of gravity. This time the fear is quieter but sharper. Not tanks, not borders, but numbers. A central bank obsessed with price stability. An export machine powered by discipline. A currency, the Deutsche Mark, that everyone else must orbit around. If Germany is about to become bigger, its money will become heavier too. François Mitterrand understands this instinctively. He is nearing the end of his political life, and he wants a lock on the future. Germany, for its part, has its own fear. Helmut Kohl knows reunification needs legitimacy. Neighbors must be reassured that Germany's power will be embedded, not unleashed, anchored inside Europe, not floating above it. So a bargain begins to form, almost without being written down. Germany will give up the symbol of its post-war redemption, the mark, in exchange for political acceptance of reunification. France will accept reunified Germany, but only if German monetary power is lifted out of Frankfurt and diluted into something European. This is the wager. France does not need to defeat Germany. It only needs to change the arena. Shift monetary authority upward into a shared institution where rules replace reflexes and negotiation replaces dominance. The question that follows is uncomfortable. If Germany's discipline built the strongest currency in Europe, why would Germany ever agree to dissolve it? And if it does, whose discipline survives in the new system? The deal does not arrive as a single signature. It arrives as a process, stretched thin across meetings, communiques, and carefully worded conclusions. December 1989, Strasbourg. European leaders meet just weeks after the wall falls. On the surface, it is a routine summit. Underneath, it is a pivot point. The path toward monetary union is formally accelerated. What had been theoretical is given a calendar. Stage 1 begins in July 1990. Capital controls are lifted. Money is allowed to flow freely across borders, even though wages, taxes, and politics remain stubbornly national. It feels like progress. It is also exposure. The system is being opened before it is finished. Behind closed doors, the trade-offs harden. Germany insists on rules. Strict, numerical, automatic. No political discretion, no inflationary shortcuts. An independent central bank modeled on the Bundesbank. France accepts this language, even promotes it because the prize is elsewhere. A single currency means a single interest rate. No more German monetary veto exercised through the mark. No more quiet dominance via exchange rates. Words like irreversibility begin to appear. Once in, no going back. This is sold as commitment. In practice, it is insurance against hesitation. If the currency cannot be reversed, then power cannot drift back to national capitals. Each side hears what it needs to hear. Germany believes it is exporting its stability culture to the continent. France believes it is importing German power into a political structure where it can be balanced, negotiated, constrained. No one calls it a trap. It doesn't feel like one. It feels like convergence. But convergence toward what, exactly, is still unanswered. Because there is a silent assumption embedded in every step that economies will become more alike over time, that productivity gaps will narrow, that discipline will spread. The mechanism depends on this belief, and if it doesn't happen, if differences persist but the currency is already locked, that question is postponed. The calendar keeps moving. February 1992. Maastricht. The process becomes law. Ink replaces intention. The treaty does not speak in metaphors. It speaks in thresholds. Budget deficits below 3% of GDP. Public debt near 60%. Inflation restrained. Exchange rates stable. These numbers are presented as neutral, technocratic, almost boring. In reality, they are moral judgments encoded as math. For France, Maastricht is the lock clicking shut. Germany's monetary power is no longer national property. It will be pooled, governed by a new central bank whose mandate is written, not inherited. The Bundesbank model survives, but stripped of its national context. Discipline without a nation behind it. For Germany, Maastricht is a reassurance. The future euro will not be soft. There will be no southern inflation trap, no political printing press. Rules will substitute for trust. Deviations will be punished automatically, without emotion. To enforce this, another layer is added: the Stability and Growth Pact. Surveillance, warnings, sanctions. Budgets remain national, but they are now judged by a supranational yardstick. The message is clear: you can spend, but only within the lines. What disappears quietly is the old escape hatch: devaluation. In the past, if competitiveness slipped, currencies could adjust. Pain was fast, visible, and national. Under Maastricht, that option vanishes. Wages, employment, and public high spending become the adjustment tools instead. This is the cage, assembled piece by piece. A single currency, separate states, hard fiscal limits, no shared treasury, no shared debt, and an assumption that everyone will behave like Germany or learn to. The treaty answers the immediate political need. Germany is bound into Europe. France has shifted the center of gravity. But it opens a deeper question that no article addresses. What happens when rules designed for one economic culture are enforced on many without a political authority to absorb the shock? The euro is now inevitable. Its consequences are not. The trap only becomes visible when you stop looking at treaties and start watching money move. The euro's machinery is simple, almost elegant. One currency, one interest rate, one central bank, But underneath, everything that makes economies different is left untouched. Taxes, welfare states, labor laws, politics. Separate fuel tanks bolted onto a shared engine. When the euro arrives, borrowing costs converge. Greece, Italy, Spain, countries that once paid high interest to compensate for inflation risk, suddenly borrow almost as cheaply as Germany. Not because they became Germany, but because the market assumes the system will not let any member fall. This is not written anywhere. It is inferred. And inference is enough. Banks respond first. A Greek government bond pays more than a German one, but under euro rules it carries almost the same regulatory treatment. Slightly higher yield, supposedly equal safety. To a balance sheet, that looks like free money. Capital flows south. Credit expands. Housing booms. Consumption rises. Wages creep upward faster than productivity. Nothing explodes. That is the danger. The system appears to work because it postpones pain. Exchange rates no longer signal imbalance. Interest rates no longer warn. The currency smooths differences instead of correcting them. Germany experiences the mirror image. Wage restraint, export competitiveness, persistent trade surpluses. Inside the euro, these surpluses no longer force the mark to rise. They accumulate silently as claims on the rest of the system. This is the lever France helped install, even if unintentionally. A structure where adjustment is asymmetric. Deficit countries must compress, cut wages, cut spending, because they cannot devalue. Surplus countries are never forced to expand. The cage tightens not through crisis, but through routine. Mortgages signed. Pensions promised. Debt rolled over. The longer it lasts, the more irreversible it becomes. The question is no longer whether the system has imbalances. It is whether anyone can afford to acknowledge them without triggering collapse. Because once fear returns, the shared engine has no clutch, and someone will have to absorb the shock. In January 1999, the euro is born quietly as an accounting currency. No coins, no banknotes, just numbers on screens. Exchange rates are fixed. Balance sheets are converted. Traders adapt in weeks. Life goes on. The real transformation comes 3 years later in January 2002, when trucks roll through Europe at night carrying cash that did not exist the day before. 14 billion banknotes, hundreds of billions in face value. ATMs recalibrated, price tags replaced. Within weeks, the euro stops feeling experimental and starts feeling inevitable. People stop converting in their heads. Salaries are negotiated in euros. Mortgages are signed in euros. Savings are stored in euros. The currency becomes habit. This is where irreversibility stops being a legal concept and becomes a psychological one. To leave the euro now would mean redenominating every contract in an economy. It would mean deciding whose debts stay in euros and whose do not. It would mean choosing winners and losers overnight. No government campaigns on that. Cheap credit deepens the illusion. Risk is still mispriced, but it is invisible to households. A family in Spain does not see capital inflows from German banks. They see a lower mortgage rate. A small business in Italy does not see regulatory arbitrage. It sees easier financing. Politics adapts to this calm. Governments promise more because financing costs stay low. Structural differences persist, but the signal that used to punish them, the currency, has been muted. The euro does not erase divergence. It hides it. This is the final seal on the trap. By the time anyone realizes that competitiveness gaps have widened rather than closed, the currency is everywhere. In wallets, in pension formulas, in accounting systems. The cost of exit has grown larger than the cost of denial. So when the global financial crisis hits in 2008, it does not strike a flexible system. It strikes one that has trained itself not to adjust. And when the shock arrives, the question is no longer whether the euro can survive unchanged. It is whether the political systems around it can survive the changes required to keep it alive. The shock does not arrive politely. It arrives through balance sheets. In 2008, banks stopped trusting each other. Liquidity freezes. What was hidden by the euro's calm suddenly demands accounting. Governments step in to save their financial systems, and public debt jumps everywhere at once. The difference is not the size of the jump. It is who controls the aftermath. By late 2009, Greece admits what markets already suspect. Its deficit numbers were fiction. Trust evaporates. Investors reprice risk, but they do it unevenly. Germany's borrowing costs fall. Greece's explode. Spain and Italy follow. The euro, meant to equalize, now magnifies divergence. The treaties say no bailouts. The reality says collapse is contagious. In May 2010, the first rescue is assembled under duress. Greece gets money, but only by accepting conditions that reach deep into domestic life. Wages cut, pensions trimmed, taxes raised, assets sold. Adjustment without devaluation, pain without exit, and something fundamental changes. Risk that markets once treated as shared is pushed back onto states. Banks are rescued, but their losses are nationalized. Debt is no longer a private miscalculation. It becomes a public identity. The temporary becomes permanent. Emergency funds turn into standing mechanisms. Surveillance intensifies. Budget drafts are reviewed before national parliaments vote on them. Economic policy, once a domestic political choice, becomes a conditional permission. This is not the collapse of the euro. It is its mutation. The system survives by rewriting its own taboos, while insisting the original rules still matter. No bailouts, except these. No transfers, except those. The question shifts again. If saving the euro requires suspending the principles it was built on, what exactly is being preserved, the rules or the currency itself? And more dangerously, who now holds the authority to decide the difference? By 2012, the crisis is narrowed into a single, unbearable question. Can the euro collapse even if no country formally leaves it? Bond markets are no longer debating Greece. They are testing Italy and Spain. The size alone changes the stakes. These economies are too large to rescue quietly, too interconnected to fail cleanly. This is the edge of the design. Europe responds by doing what it swore it would never do, but doing it indirectly. A permanent firewall is created. The European Stability Mechanism. Capital paid in, rules written, access conditional. It looks like a fund. It functions like a treasury without admitting it is one. Then in July, the real intervention happens. Not with money, but with words. The head of the central bank states that the euro will be defended, whatever it takes. No numbers, no limits. Just a promise that the central bank is willing to act as the buyer of last resort for sovereign debt, if necessary. Markets believe it instantly. Yields fall before a single bond is purchased. This is the paradox. The system is stabilized not by rules, but by discretion, the very thing it was designed to exclude. But the price of calm is hierarchy. Countries under pressure must accept oversight, reform schedules, fiscal targets. Domestic politics are bent around external credibility. Elections change governments, but not trajectories. Germany, whose discipline once seemed diluted by the euro, now finds its preferences embedded in the survival conditions of the system. France, which sought to bind Germany through shared money, discovers that saving the euro requires enforcing stability norms at home as well. The cage holds, but it holds by adding bars, more coordination, more surveillance, more central authority without a single electorate behind it. The euro survives the moment. Yet the question it leaves behind is sharper than before. If the currency can only be saved by becoming something it was never meant to be, what exactly has Europe agreed to live inside? In the end, the gamble closes in on itself. France entered the euro with a strategic intent: bind Germany's monetary power inside a shared structure, neutralize the dominance of the mark, and turn German discipline into a European rule book rather than a national weapon. It worked, just not in the direction Paris imagined. Germany did lose its national currency, but its economic reflexes survived the transition. Stability, surplus, restraint. These did not dissolve inside the euro. They became conditions for survival. When the crisis came, the system did not drift toward political discretion. It snapped toward rules, enforcement, and conditionality. The very traits France hoped to dilute became the price of keeping the correct. And France discovered something uncomfortable. Inside the euro, there is no outside. High debt, weak growth, political resistance to reform, these no longer trigger devaluation. They trigger scrutiny, pressure, negotiation with markets and institutions that do not vote in national elections. This is the locked-in paradox. The euro prevents collapse by making exit unthinkably costly. But that same irreversibility forces countries to adapt internally, even when the political system resists. The cage protects and constrains at the same time. Germany is bound, but so is France, bound to fiscal rules it did not always follow, bound to market discipline it cannot escape, bound to a currency that demands deeper integration every time it is tested, because a half-built system keeps recreating full-scale crises. The euro no longer asks whether Europe wants more union. It asks who will decide it and under what pressure. Each crisis narrows the options. Each rescue raises the stakes. Each compromise pushes authority upward quietly, incrementally. The original bet was about control. Who would shape Europe's future? The outcome is about dependence, on institutions, on credibility, on a structure that cannot stand still. And that leaves the final question, hanging in the present tense. If the euro can only survive by tightening the lock, how much room is left to move inside it before stability itself becomes the next source of fracture?